Hey everyone, welcome to the Shameless Podcast. I'm Srinidhi.
I'm Hanya.
I'm Abby.
I'm Dylan.
I'm Emily, and we are the founders of SHAMEless.
Hi everyone, welcome to the Shameless Podcast. This is episode 2 of the Activism series, and in honor of Pride Month, we have 2 guest speakers from the LGBTQ plus community who will be sharing their stories.
Hi, I'm so happy to be here. I'm Jane, and I'm here with my friend Sawyer. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm so excited to share my story with you guys.
Hello, like Jane said, my name is Sawyer, and my pronouns are they, them, and I'm so excited to be here and talk about this because it's Pride Month.
Welcome, Jane and Sawyer. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I guess we'll just start with Jane. You can start by sharing your story.
Okay, awesome. So I guess I'll start out in elementary school. Back then, I didn't have much knowledge about the LGBTQ plus community. I went to a very small private school and just grew up in a secluded environment. And I really just saw it as you're either straight, gay, or lesbian. Um, at my school, being gay it was kind of a weird concept. We treated it as an unordinary thing. I remember the boys in my grade, they would, when they were horseplaying around in class or touching each other, hugging each other, they would say things like, "Oh, ew, that's so gay. You're so gay." They would also start saying the phrase "no homo" if they complimented each other or said something that could come off as gay and to justify that they weren't. And when I saw this, it was kind of just normalized. Even I think I, at one point, would use the phrase "no homo" with my friends. So my first exposure to someone that I was close with that was homosexual was actually one of my relatives. And when I found out that my relative was gay, it kind of changed my view on the gay community because I saw how my family members treated him. And it wasn't like the people at my school. They treated him no different than how they treated any of the other family members. And so from this point on, I I started to become more open about the gay community. I remember when I was younger, when I watched movies, I started to catch myself um, noticing the girl in romance scenes more than the guy in Disney movies or uh, family shows. And I realized it, but I just kind of ignored it. I don't think I even really acknowledged that I did this until later on, but now that I look back, it all makes sense. But yeah, in 7th grade, I remember I was scrolling through YouTube and I came across a music video called Girls Like Girls by Haley Kiyoko. And there was a part in the music video where 2 girls kiss, and right when I saw this, I shut my computer and I just tried to forget that I saw it. I just felt so guilty in that moment. I don't know why. Like, I guess the concept of homosexuality among girls was strange for me. So yeah, I didn't make it through the whole music video. And at that point, that night, I remember starting having thoughts, questioning myself. What if I'm not straight? I could be homosexual. And I saw it as a negative thing, I guess. I was just mad at myself and I couldn't sleep that night. I tried to block out the thoughts. Um, I I knew at that point in 7th grade that I had had many guy crushes. So why was I questioning my sexuality? Why could I possibly think that I could like girls? It just made no sense to me. I knew that homosexuality wasn't abnormal uh, by that time, but I guess it was that fear of being different from my school friends or from other people that I interacted with. So yeah, I ignored these thoughts all throughout elementary school. I remember I was in a sports team in 7th grade, and I started to notice this one girl at our practices. Just like every time we high fived or interacted, um, but I just completely ignored it after the season was over. Then 9th grade, I went to a public high school, and in this environment, there were people that were much more aware of the LGBTQ plus community. There was a lot more awareness. And I started to learn and be exposed to other sexualities, such as pansexual, bisexual, asexual, because I started meeting students and becoming friends with people of those different sexualities. And so, um, yeah, I started to become more open, and the questioning of my own sexuality started to emerge again because I started to catch myself noticing girls in movies or in TikToks that I watched. And so at that point, I accepted, okay, I find girls attractive, and that's okay. I mean, I still like guys, so I was convinced that, yeah, I'm still straight. So then still in 9th grade, I was on a freshman sports team, and again, this was like a repeat of 7th grade. I started noticing one of the teammates at practice, and every time we interacted, I would get nervous, and I would have trouble keeping conversation because it's basically how I was when I interacted with one of my guy crushes. Um, it was the same feeling, and it wasn't how I felt when I was interacting with some of my girlfriends. Um, So I questioned why am I acting this way? This is so weird. Um, and then one day I forgot what the scenario was, but she hugged me, and at that moment I felt so many butterflies. I was so confused. Um, and again, I just tried to ignore it and not think anything of it. Um, I remember with this teammate we hung out a couple times outside of school with friend groups. But in these events, I would try to stick with her and talk to her. Um, I was always just focused on becoming closer with her. Then COVID hit, we went into a pandemic, and I kind of forgot about these feelings. So sophomore year comes around, and one of my friends comes out as bi. And at this point, I've already had a couple friends who were bi. Um, but this specific scenario, um, and this friend actually is Sawyer, the other guest here today. Um, but at the time, they told me that they were bi, and I immediately had a thought in my head, you're also bi. And then I was like, no, what? Why am I thinking that? No. And so then um, I thought that it was so courageous that they came out, and I thought that I could do the same, but then I completely blocked out that thought. Um, and then I remember having a conversation about bisexuality with my family, and um, in one of the conversations we had about it, I remember my parents said some things about how bisexuality wasn't real, um, and so that's when I kind of thought, if it's not real, then I must be straight because I like guys. So if I ever have thought about liking girls, I mean, I can't be a lesbian. That just makes no sense to me. Um, so yeah, after that conversation with my parents, I was just confused again. Um, and then I got on a sports team sophomore year, and that same teammate from the freshman team, I kept thinking about. And every time we interacted again, the nerves would come, and um, at that point, I was like, okay, I acknowledge now that I am bi. I didn't really. I was just very scared, and also just the ingrained heterosexuality in me and the inner homophobia, I guess, internalized homophobia, just made me very scared and also just mad at myself for being different and for acknowledging this. And then my relative, who I mentioned earlier, that he came to visit, and I knew that I wanted to have a conversation with him about it, but I didn't think that I would be emotionally ready to say it out loud. But then I just ended up saying it when we were both having a one-on-one conversation, and I was so happy with how he reacted, and I'm glad that I chose him to come out to first. And I remember one thing. I mean, he was obviously very happy for me. He congratulated me, and one thing that he said stood out to me, and it was he acknowledged that it's okay to be scared. That's normal because obviously we live in a biased world where heterosexuality is considered the majority and is considered the norm, right? And he said, just remember to stay true to yourself no matter what anyone else says. Don't let anyone try to convince you that you're something that you're not, because this is a moment where you have discovered yourself on your own and you are who you believe you are. So that gave me a lot of confidence. Um, and from there, I told Sawyer and I told my siblings, but it was still the conversation with my parents. I was kind of pushing back. Um, that was kind of like the conversation I feared the most. I finally came out to my parents, and the conversation actually came naturally. But before I did, I made sure to kind of bring up the conversation of bisexuality first, um, just to make sure they were a little more educated and more aware. So then by the time I came out to them, they were surprised. They were definitely shocked, but they understood me more. And thankfully, the situation ended nicely. I know this isn't the case for a lot of people. I had some friends in middle school and high school who told me about their coming out stories that just ended terribly, um and I guess we can go into why in our society it's so hard to come out later on in the podcast. But I think my story pretty much ends here. um I still haven't told a lot of people that I'm bisexual, but I'm glad that I told the people close to me, because just the relief and the weight that has kind of been burdening me since seventh grade is finally lifted off. And I'm glad that we have Pride Month where we can feel appreciated and acknowledged. And I'm also just glad that I have this platform to speak out. Um, so, yeah, that's the end of my story. Thank you guys.
Yay! I'm proud of you for telling your parents. That's very big boy moves.
Thank you, Soy.
I'm just so happy for you. And yeah, I guess now it's my turn to share my story. So I'm gonna start way back in elementary school when Obama was like, hey, gay marriage is now legal. And that was such a new concept to me because I did not know what gay meant. And I remember my parents not being happy about it, but they were like more neutral about it. And since I didn't understand what it was, I just thought it was not right. Just like how a lot of people who do not understand what the LGBTQ plus community is think that it's wrong to be part of the community because we tend to be afraid of things that we don't understand. And that same year, when I was in third grade, I did a competition for something, and the person who won was a transgender woman. And my teacher and my mom were like, why do such people even exist? And later, when I was trying to ask my mom more questions about why the woman looked kind of like a man, since they were probably transitioning, my mom did not want to answer any of my questions and just said, like, don't pay attention to these kind of people. And I was like, what the fuck does that mean? Yeah, my parents were not exactly the most supportive of the LGBTQ plus community. And I'm guessing that's probably because they themselves didn't have an understanding on what it was. And then when I went back to school, my fourth grade friend, and at the time I was still a third grader. They randomly asked me, "Do you support gay people?" And I was like, "What does that mean?" So then she explained me, and I was all like, "Well, no, that's wrong because a man and a woman getting married was the concept that I was more familiar with. And again, we tend to be afraid of things that we don't understand." So then she was like, "You're homophobic." And I was all like, "What does that mean?" And she explained me what it meant. And then I was all like, "Yeah, well, I guess I am." So then, all throughout elementary school, I had lots of crushes on boys, and I always dreamed of one day getting married to one of my crushes. And I had never even like had one thought about being with a girl because heterosexuality was so ingrained in my mind, and I was so confined within the prison of heterosexuality because I did not know anything beyond it. But when I got into middle school, I remember things started to change, just like with Jane. And I remember I used to be like checking out all the girls all the time, and I just thought that I was probably like comparing myself to them. But now I know that I clearly wasn't. And in seventh grade, I actually joined a club at my school that talked about diversity. And there I learned about so many different sexualities and the oppression that the LGBTQ plus community has faced and is still facing. And it really opened up my eyes to this community that felt so new to me. And then in eighth grade, I ended up running that club where I continued the conversation about the community. And I think that this club was like what made me finally start to understand what the community was. And I actually ended up, oh, wait, I just repeated that. Okay, yeah. But anyway, I joined another club in eighth grade called GSA, which stands for Gay Straight Alliance, I think. And that's where I met people with different sexualities. And I was like, whoa, this community is so cool. But I never thought that I could be a part of that community for some reason. Now looking back, I feel like because I didn't see any Asian representation in the LGBTQ plus community, it was hard for me to picture myself being a part of that community. So now I want to go like more into like my self discovery and like when it started to become more obvious to me what my sexuality was. So in ninth grade, I started to see like more representation of the LGBTQ plus community in general, which made me realize, okay, maybe if I was a part of this community, I would be accepted. And funny story. So in ninth grade, I was at a football game and a school football game. And then there was this one girl, and I didn't like know her that well. Like she was in my biology class, but we never really talked that much. I just saw her like sitting there, and then I went up to her, and then we just like started talking. And then like as a joke, I was randomly like, "Hey, do you want to go to homecoming with me?" And then she was all like, "Yeah, of course." Like we were just like joking. But yeah, we went to homecoming together as like a joke. But yeah, a lot of people thought it was real, and a lot of people thought it was lesbian, which is very funny. But yeah, that was a fun time. Anyway, so yeah, then I guess because of that experience, I was like kind of questioning like, what if like I actually wanted this relationship with her to be real? And then I was like, no, I'm probably just tripping or something. And then over quarantine, like because I've been by myself for like long periods of time, it's given me more time to figure out what my sexuality is. And about like 6 or 7 months ago, so like half a year ago, I came out as bi, and I was really happy that like I finally accepted that um I like girls. And yeah, but oh, I'm not gonna say but. Okay. So yeah, and then like a month after I came out as bi, I actually ended up kind of be in a relationship with a boy, and I I feel like the whole time I was in that relationship, I I don't know, I always felt uncomfortable for some reason thinking about it as a relationship. And I mean, it wasn't like a very like strict relationship, but still, like I, it was hard for me to think of it like that, even though I felt like I wanted it to be like that. And I remember I would treat this boy like more as a friend, I guess, than like a significant other. And I ended up like losing feelings for this person like really fast, and and I was like so surprised by myself because I thought that what we had was like really really good, and it being my first relationship, I wanted it to last like a while, but it didn't. So yeah, and also I realized actually like a couple weeks ago that I'm a lesbian. Yeah. So that was a huge, huge surprise to me and to a lot of other people because of the way people perceive me. When I came out to people as gay, I was really surprised by people's reactions because when I came out as bisexual, like people were like really, really happy for me. But when I came out as gay, it was more like a confused reaction from a lot of people. And yeah, a lot of people were like, well, you were in a relationship with a guy, so how can you like suddenly be gay? But like, I don't think people understand that that's not how it works. Just because I was in a relationship with a guy, that doesn't mean that like I was fully done with like my self discovery myself, and like there's a reason why I felt uncomfortable when I was with this person. So yeah, and like it just made me realize how rigid some people's points of views are, and it just made me realize more that I have to stay true to myself, even if other people are telling me that what I'm feeling is wrong. And I never thought that I'd be able to tell my family because of like all of the stigma around being part of a community. But I did end up getting the courage to tell one of my siblings. And when I did tell my sibling, I was very happy with their reaction because they just all like, oh, that's fine. And then they just like went on as it was like a normal conversation, which I'm fine with because like at least they accept me. And I mean it shouldn't have to be like that, but hopefully things change. And now that I've talked about my sexuality for a very long time, I'm gonna go back in time and talk about my gender. So in ninth grade, I started to notice that, like, for a very long time, I had been dressing very differently from like all of the other girls, and I was just all like, "Oh, that's cause it's probably just like my style or something." But then, yeah, I don't know. I just I I realized like, oh, like a lot of other girls like don't wear this, but a lot of guys do, and then that's when I guess I started like questioning my gender. And actually, a couple months ago, I realized that maybe I'm non-binary, but then I ended up being gender fluid. So I think it really hit harder when I realized that I'm gender fluid than when I thought that I was bi or when I realized I was gay, because I was like, what am I going to do now? And I was like really confused because like what will my parents think, and then I'm gonna have to deal with everyone calling me by like different pronouns and thinking of me in different ways than I want to be thought of, like as a girl instead of like gender fluid. And then I was like faced with a lot of gender dysphoria, which made me even more scared and confused. And I just wished that I could be normal or at least have someone to support me. And I think that was like, yeah, one of like the hardest time that I had this past year, because like there were just so many unanswered questions that I had. And like from do I want to get top surgery to do I want, am I comfortable with like being myself around other people? And I guess those are just like really scary and huge parts of your life to think about. And I I ended up coming out to some people through text, and because I couldn't see like the other person complete reaction, I was kind of like really angry at some of the people's responses, because like I didn't know what they actually were trying to say, like, or what the intent of the text was. And that like made me like really sad, because I thought that some people like weren't very accepting of me. I think one person that really helped me was Alok, and their Instagram is at AlokVmenon, ALOKVMENON. And this person is an Asian queer person, and I was just like, wow, like for once I'm actually seeing like representation. And I'm finally seeing like someone in the Asian American community who is breaking the gender binary and is like expressing themselves how they want and being so confident and so comfortable in their skin. And this person like really inspired me to just like be myself and not care about what others think. Now I finally feel like I'm in the place where I accept my gender and my sexuality, even though there are times when it's really hard to think about. And it used to like bother me so much that people probably don't see me the way that I want them to, because I am Asian, and because that like someone like me doesn't seem like they are or could be part of the community. Um, but now I'm just like, it doesn't matter what other people think, because as long as like I accept myself. And one person who actually helped me like realize that was someone I saw on YouTube. Their name is Janaya, I believe. And what they said is, if I am jailed within the limits of your imagination, you have to remain there as the guard. I'm free. And I think this really helped me, because they're basically saying that you may think of me as this thing, but that's what you think in your head. But I'm free and I can think whatever I want of myself. So yeah. And I just hope that I can continue this journey of self-discovery. And I'm so honored to be on this journey of self-discovery, regardless of all the challenges that I've faced along the way, because they've only made me stronger and made me learn more about my self-worth and self-respect and the value that I bring to myself and others. And please, if you take anything away from what I've said, is that we are usually scared about the things that we don't have knowledge on. So please continue to educate yourself and understand the LGBTQ plus community, because we are real and we deserve to be accepted.
Thank you so much for sharing your story with us, Sawyer and Jane. I really learned a lot from your stories, and I'm sure all of our listeners learned a lot too.
Thank you so much, Jane and Sawyer, for sharing your stories. They were really interesting to hear. And like Hanya said, a lot of the listeners will have learned something from them. One thing that I would like to ask Sawyer though is I'm a little bit confused about the difference between non-binary and gender fluid, and I think there probably will be some listeners who are as well. Do you think you could explain that?
First of all, before I say this, it's the definition is basically up to whoever identifies themselves as any of these terms. But to me, what non-binary means is not conforming to like male or female, but like gender fluid to me means seeing yourself as male and female. So for me, like, I guess it's more like sometimes I feel more female and like sometimes I feel more male, and that's why I like to call myself gender fluid. But gender fluid like still falls under the umbrella of non-binary. So yeah, that's why some places you might just see non-binary and not both non-binary and gender.
Just to clarify, they're both very similar terms.
I guess they're similar in that they don't stick with either or, like they don't stick with one gender or the other. But I guess the difference is gender fluid identifies as both at different times, but non-binary just doesn't identify with either.
Some people who would like who you'd think fall like more underneath like the category of gender fluid, like they still feel like more like using the term non-binary. And some people just like to use the term non-binary because it's a prettier word.
Thank you. That makes so much more sense.
I wanted to kind of hop on to what Sawyer mentioned earlier while explaining their story. I remember, Sawyer, you said that you never thought you could even be a member of the LGBTQ community before, and I definitely feel the same way. Obviously, in the beginning, I said that I wasn't very well educated or aware of what the community was, and now I have definitely a different perspective, and I'd like to share that perspective with our listeners and to you guys. Um, I definitely think sexuality is a spectrum, um, and it's not black or white, straight or gay. You identify as a sexuality, but you can be, let's say, 80% more leaning towards the straight side, but you can still have some attraction for girls. You just identify as straight. Um, and so I think kind of understanding that middle ground of you're not 100% this or that, I guess could be a good mindset to understand ourselves better.
I agree with you, Jane. I definitely think sexuality is a spectrum, and I think that's something that a lot of people have difficulty grasping because as humans, we're just used to categorizing things. And for a lot of the older generations, I feel like that spectrum concept is confusing to them because they're just used to, even like my parents, they're just used to straight or gay, and they don't really understand the in between and how you can't be 100% one thing or the other. Um, but hopefully, with the new generation, our generation, and with all this awareness going around, hopefully we can change that and how it's viewed. So I do have a question for both of you, Jane and Sawyer. How was your experience coming out, and do you have any advice for some people who may be struggling with that?
Yeah, definitely. I'd say that you don't need to know right away. Like, if society puts so much pressure on you to just know who you are immediately, and you don't. Just take your time, and you will find out eventually. And if you don't, that's all right, as long as you accept who you are in that moment.
And just remember, there are a lot of different factors that can kind of elongate the process of self-discovery. At least for me, going from a private school to a public school, I definitely saw that the change in environment helped me to discover my sexuality better because in this new environment, once I reached high school, I surrounded myself with people who were more accepting of different sexualities. Um, and just know that it's not easy coming out. We live, as I said before, in a society where heterosexuality is pushed on us. It's, as Sawyer mentioned before, ingrained in us, um, because that is considered the social norm. And breaking through that barrier and acknowledging that you're not what society has made you believe is hard. The amount of time it takes to discover that is different and varies person to person. Personally, for me, um, with my experience with coming out, I just disliked the whole idea of it, um, because obviously people view you as one thing. They view you as a certain way your whole life, and now you're telling them that you're not what they saw you as. And that's definitely scary. I feel like in order to make it easier for the LGBTQ community to come out, we just shouldn't have pre assumptions of who people are. My biggest example of this, I guess, would be at family gatherings. You know, that common question that relatives asks, are you dating anyone? You know, what's the situation with the guys, the boyfriends? Um, I'm sure we can all relate, you know, to them immediately assuming that you like the opposite sex. Um, and I just hope that as our society becomes more accepting of the LGBTQ community, we also change our mindset towards what we expect of people.
I have another question for Jane and Sawyer. What advice would you give to people who are not a part of this community but would like to be better allies to this community?
Well, keep on learning, do your research, figure out what all of these different terms mean, and figure out the appropriate terms to call people in the community so that you don't offend anyone. And if you do offend someone and they tell you that please don't say this, then listen to them and don't say it. It's pretty easy.
Yes, education, please. Um, One like big misconception that I've heard from people is if you dress a certain way, it implies what sexuality or gender you are. Um, I've heard, you know, if you dress more masculine and tomboyish, you're probably a lesbian. If you dress more feminine, you're probably gay. And although that could be true for some, that's not true for all, right? So you can be tomboyish, right? But still be straight, but still be a straight girl. Um, and like, especially with men, there was that whole thing going around about breaking toxic masculinity, um, with Harry Styles, you know, wearing dresses, um, in his concept photos. Uh, and I think that's great that, you know, we're becoming more aware that clothing does not define what sexuality or gender you are. And another, I guess, thing I want to bring up is sexuality and gender are two different things, right? Gender is the different ones we've mentioned are non binary, gender fluid, um, male and female, and there are many others. And then sexuality is, I guess, your attraction, who you're attracted to. So yeah, so I just wanted to also point that out.
I just wanted to note an observation that I've had, and maybe your thoughts on it. But especially when I traveled, I've seen beggars on the side of the street. And in some areas, there are a lot of transgender people who are begging on the street. And with my relatives around me, I've seen a sort of fear from them. And like, I think it's just because they're not educated on exactly like who they are and, you know, why they're dressing in a different way, they would have a fear of like approaching them, or like they're like, stay away from these people especially. Have you ever experienced that yourself, or maybe just some thoughts on a fear of the LGBT community?
I think what Sawyer said in their story earlier about how people tend to fear what they don't know, um, comes to play here because a lot of the time, since there's a lack of education on the LGBTQ plus community, people tend to just their first instinct is to just fear them. And it's really sad because just because you're part of the LGBTQ plus community doesn't mean you're dangerous or that they're just an oppressed group of people who are trying to find themselves. But it's disappointing that so many people have such negative feelings towards the LGBTQ plus community. I know there was a lot of attacks on transgender women in recent years, which is very unfortunate, and I honestly don't know how you can be so cruel to people who are just trying to discover themselves, or who have discovered themselves and are just happen to be different from what's considered normal. But those standards of what's considered normal are so outdated.
There was someone I remember who was talking about how they believed that homosexuality is more of an inclination than something you identify with. Uh, they said that you can resist this inclination of attraction towards the same sex, similar to how you can resist having sex before marriage. It's more of a temptation, they said. I just found it interesting that they define homosexuality in this way when they're not homosexual themselves, when they haven't experienced, knowing that they're different since birth, but not knowing exactly what they are. You can't decide what something is if you haven't experienced it yourself.
I definitely think it is easier for people to tell another group of people what they're doing wrong when they aren't a part of that group of people. Like, I guess that's just common sense, but I feel like if you're not a part of that group of people, shouldn't you be more sensitive to how they feel and try to understand them from their perspective instead of just tell them what's right or wrong from your perspective?
I had a recent experience with this, and I was very shocked by it, and I thought it was really disappointing. But I hosted a menstrual product drive, and I put up posters to advertise it so that we could get donations. And on the posters, I put a menstrual product drive. Um, and unfortunately, some of these posters were taken down because the administration of this place believed that menstrual was the wrong wording. It was supposed to be feminine products, but I thought that was really disappointing because I made a specific point before putting up these posters as an education point to this whole community that not all menstruators are female. There are a bunch of transgender people and non-binary people who menstruate, and so it's important to be inclusive, and that's why you don't use the word feminine products, you use menstrual products. And that just brings me to the point that even in a topic where only the people who are menstruating should have a say about what the products should be named, people still think that it's black and white, male and female, and only female menstruate. But the fact is that there's a whole nother group of people that still do menstruate. And it's so important to be inclusive of everyone.
So to close off, do you guys have anything to say to the listeners? Maybe any advice or just last thoughts?
I just wanted to say to our viewers, I hope maybe you learned something new, and I hope we've inspired you to seek for understanding for any topic you are confused about or unsure about related to the LGBTQ plus community. Also, if you are wanting to come out and, if they have a reaction that you're not quite expecting, a reaction that's hard to hear, don't let that reaction invalidate you discovering your identity. Don't let it make you doubt your identity. Just you acknowledging for yourself is a very glorious and courageous moment, and it should be an incredibly prideful moment for yourself. That is why, this is called Pride Month, because we should be proud of this barrier that we're breaking in society.
I think Jane said a lot of good stuff. So all I have to say is be you, be true, be you, and the world looks better in color. Yeah.
Yay! Thank you guys so much. Thanks for tuning in on this episode of the Shameless Podcast. Stay tuned for more episodes of our activism series. See you next time!